In this video, we're going to be taking a look at education in ancient Persia, particularly during the Achaemenid Empire. As you probably are already aware of, the Achaemenid Empire was one of the most powerful empires of ancient civilization. In fact, they were so powerful that these are the individuals who overthrew the Neo-Babylonian Empire that was led by Nebuchadnezzar at one point in time, as depicted in the Bible. They're also the ones who set the Jews free and sent them back to Jerusalem, and this is all described in ancient history and also inside sacred texts as the scriptures, the Hebrew Bible. The religion of this particular group of people was Zoroastrianism. This particular religion emphasized this struggle between the forces of good and evil, which is an ideal that is captured in many other religions. It's not exclusive to them. But what we want to focus on, because we're looking at education here, is the role of the leaders of this religion, who were the Magi, because the Magi played a role in the education of princes, and they were also responsible for other sacred duties as well. And these are the same Magi that are referred to in the Bible who came to visit Jesus at his birth. And the reason perhaps that they came to his birth after they traveled to Jerusalem and then finally to Bethlehem was because the Magi were also expected to study the stars and have a knowledge of astronomy. And so, as depicted in the Bible, there was an unusually bright star at the birth of Jesus, and the Magi followed this star until they found Jesus in the stables as depicted in the Gospels. So not only did we have the Magi providing education to the princes, but we also had to have another set of individuals who were providing education to the commoners. And normally the responsibility of this task would fall upon retired military soldiers, men above the age of 50, who were retired and were able to continue to contribute to society by training up the next generation. The educational system in ancient Persia was divided basically into 4 stages. The first stage took place from birth until the age of 7, and this is when the child was at home with their parents, primarily with the mother. An unusual trait of ancient Persian culture that is maybe different from many other cultures today is the fact that Persian children were really not taught right from wrong until about the age of 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, they're just kind of doing whatever without any kind of a sense of discipline. And then at the age of 5, they begin to teach right or wrong. However, discipline in terms of maybe perhaps some form of corporal punishment in terms of spanking or whatever did not even begin until 7, which was the age when they began to go to school. Again, this is very unique from other cultures in which they believe in providing a sense of morality and understanding as early as possible, and it definitely supports some form of punishment to facilitate that process, as we would find in the ancient Indian cultures, ancient Indian education, as we discussed in another video. At the age of 7, as already mentioned, the child will begin their formal education, and this was conducted by the state. Within ancient Persian culture, there was a belief that children belonged to the state, and therefore it was the state's responsibility to provide education and training for that child in order to build up the nation or to build up the empire. And so children would go to school at around the age of 7, and the sign that it was time to go to school was the loss of baby teeth. As teeth fell out, usually beginning around the age of 6 or 7, it was a sign to all those around that this particular child was no longer a baby, and it was time to begin formal education. There was no sort of home tutoring, there was no sort of homeschooling. They went to the state schools. At these schools, which lasted from the age of 7 to the age of 15, there was a heavy emphasis on physical training. This was training boys to eventually be military soldiers who would go out and expand and extend and defend the empire. And there was also a focus placed on memorization. We often in the West look down upon the heavy emphasis on memorization in the East. But we have to keep in mind that during this time, there were no smartphones, cell phones, or iPads to remember information for you. The only way a person could know something as if it was within their mind and they were able to efficiently recall it. Therefore, this is one reason perhaps that they placed a heavy emphasis on memorization. Moral training also began at this age, because remember, from the ages of 0 to 5 and up until 7, the ideal of what is right or wrong was not considered important. But now the state was taking over this responsibility and trying to instill a sense of justice and morality inside the children. There's a story from the life of Cyrus the Great, that when he was a boy, and this is the same Cyrus the Great who liberated the Jews and defeated the Neo-Babylonian Empire. When this Cyrus the Great was a boy, his teachers shared with him a story and asked Cyrus to judge what was the best thing to do in this situation. And the story involves two boys. There was a large boy, a very, very big boy, who owned a small coat. And there was a little boy who owned a very, very large coat. And what the big boy did was he took the large coat from the small boy and he gave the small boy his small coat. And the teacher asked Cyrus, was this the right thing to do? Should the large boy with the small coat take the large boy with the small coat, should he take the little boy's large coat? And Cyrus said, this is correct, because now both boys have a coat that fits them. Cyrus the Great's teacher was disappointed in his answer and basically beat him for it. He was disappointed. And he told Cyrus, the question was not which coat fits which boy. The question was which coat belongs to which boy. If the large boy takes the small boy's coat, that is stealing. And so you can see here how the educational system was providing scenarios to train the children to understand how to judge what was right and what was wrong. Stage 1, or the first stage of the formal education, went from 7 to 15. At the beginning of stage 2, if you will, from ages 15 to 25, this was even more in-depth, more arduous and strenuous military training, because building up the state was already a primary focus. Reading and writing was taught at a minimal level to help people to function in society, but advanced scholarly work was reserved for the Magi. And also during the second stage of the state education, the young men basically now would go into the marketplaces and watch and see how the men would judge different challenges and problems in the marketplace to learn how to think critically and to solve problems. The final stage of the educational system essentially doesn't really end. It begins at the age of 25 and concludes at the age of 50 when they complete their military service. And so this is when the young man would go off, fight in the campaigns, fight on the trail, in the battles. And if they were able to survive this 25 years of warfare and battle, the best of those soldiers would be chosen to be teachers for the next generation. And so the cycle continues. One thing that is missing from this discussion is education for women. Women were not given an education if you define education in terms of being trained the same way as men were. The education of women, which is often not called an education, involved learning how to manage a home and raise the children. They were educated, but they were not educated in the same way that men were educated. And so, as we can see here, the Persian educational system was dominated and controlled by the state. The goal was to expand and to defend the empire, to bring, glory to the leaders, the kings, the satraps, and whatever, in order to maintain a strong empire. And this approach lasted for several centuries. However, one thing that is lost in this particular situation is that ability for autonomy and free choice in terms of what you would like to do with your life. But with all systems, there are your strengths and weaknesses, and these are the things that we discuss as we've talked about education in ancient Persia. So I just want to thank you for watching or listening to this particular video on education in ancient Persia, and we look forward to seeing you in future videos. Take care.